I'm the executive of the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, which is the organizer of this site event. The UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub was launched at COP26 in Glasgow. And the main purpose of this Global Innovation Hub is actually to help use innovation in a more effective manner. So today, the focus of the site event is presenting the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub. It will be divided into two parts. A first part where I will make a presentation, and a second part where we'll have a panel discussion with distinguished panelists. So let's start with the presentation. The Global Innovation Hub, as I have said, was introduced at COP26 to maximize the effectiveness of the use of innovation to support both climate and sustainability. We were of the view that there was some possible improvement in that area. And the main barrier, actually, that prevent an effective use of innovation to support climate and sustainability is the absence of moonshot mindset when we are setting target. When we are setting target in climate, we have the tendency to set our target and commitment based on what is perceived as possible. We will look at the financial solution that is already available to us. We will look at the policies that are already available. We will look at the technology that are already available to us. And this is based on all these things that we are making our commitment and target. This does not provide space for innovation because our targets are based on instruments that are already in place. Now the problem is this lead to a vicious circle where the lack of climate and sustainability solution on the one hand, and the lack of ambition at the other hand are stuck. They are stuck in a vicious circle because each of them is at the same time cause and consequence of the other one. Those that are setting target will say we cannot be ambitious because we do not have the solution and we want to be credible. And then those that are providing the solution will say we do not have the demand because there is no ambition. So we are stuck in a vicious circle. So the first thing that we wanted to do is to find a way to break this vicious circle. Next slide. And then the problem with this vicious circle is that it does not allow us to work on the real problem. Because as long as we do not know what is the gap between what is possible now and where we need to be, unless we know that gap, we do not know what the problem is. We are working on things that are not the real problem. And this reminds me one story that was shared with me with my friend Dennis. He was saying that somebody lost his key in the dark, but then was looking for the key under the street light. And people asked him, but you did not lose your key here. He said, yes, but the light is here. And this is exactly what is currently happening. People are working on what is perceived as possible. They are not working on what is needed. And we have this quote that I like a lot. We fail more often because we solve the wrong problem. Because we have the tendency to work on what we think we can solve. And most of the time, this is not the right problem. Next slide. Now, how to break this vicious circle? Here we come up with a quite original proposal that we would like to sell to national government, subnational, and corporate, as well as financial and all type of climate actors that are acting on climate. So currently what we have is unconditional commitment and conditional commitment, but the conditional commitment are most of the time conditional to finance. And more importantly, none of the two, neither the unconditional nor the conditional, are aligned with the 1.5 degree goal most of the time. So we understand that people that are making commitment generally would like to make it based on their capability. So what we are proposing is in each commitment we will have 3 components. A first component that is based on capability, that would be equivalent to the unconditional commitment that we have currently. And this is what I can do, and I make a commitment on that. A second commitment that is based on what is needed to be aligned with the 1.5 degree goal. And that second commitment will be conditional, but not to finance, conditional to availability of climate and sustainability solution. And then a third commitment that is to work, to act on the global demand for climate and sustainability solution, because what we will do, the gap between the commitment that is based on capability and the commitment that is aligned with the 1.5 degree goal, this gap will be translated into a demand for climate and sustainability solution. And all this demand for climate and sustainability solution will be aggregated into one global demand for climate and sustainability solution. And we will invite all people that are making target and commitment to commit to contribute in addressing the global aggregated climate and demand for climate and sustainability solution. So 3 elements in the commitment, 1 based on capability, unconditional, 1 conditional based on availability of climate and sustainability solution, and a third one to contribute to the global demand for climate and sustainability solution. Why this is important? This is really what collaboration means for me. We need to recognize that the current level of collaboration among nations and within nations is not suitable to address the big challenge that we have currently. We need to do much more. And this is only when each entity is not just focusing on trying to be net zero, but also is contributing to what will enable others to be net zero. This is only if you have this mindset that we can start doing what we call here a radical collaboration. Next slide. So one of the key problems, now it's the second problem. This was the first problem, now we are addressing the second problem. The second problem that we have noticed is that in our current economical system, everything is centered around the system for wealth production. All the different elements of our society are serving the system for wealth production. So if you take people, they are not people, but they are employees, and they are consumers serving the system for wealth production. If you take natural resources, they are simply input to the system for wealth production. You take the environment, this is space where they can store waste, actually, all type of waste, on air, within water, and also on soil, and so and so. Even when it comes to innovation, innovation is only focusing on the system for production of wealth. So it means that innovation is sector-based. This is more about how do we improve the current system for production of wealth. And even more surprising, and this is what is happening, the carbon budget. This is what is left to us. The carbon budget has been attributed to the system of wealth production. It was sectoral. We said 7 sectors, this amount of CO2. Aluminum sector, this amount of CO2. Like if the system for wealth production is the only thing that is, let's say, that cannot be changed, and it becomes the purpose. Instead of being a means, it becomes a purpose. Next slide. An alternative is to actually put people at the center. And then there are no more simple employees and consumer. They are people that aim at flourishing life. And we will put at the center flourishing life for 10 billion people. And our focus at the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub is, for the time being, on 5 core human needs: nutrition and health, shelter, access, clothing, and leisure. And the question that we are asking is, can we go beyond? This is important, we need to do it, but can we go beyond using innovation only to improve current product and services? So when it comes to climate change, it means, can we use innovation beyond simply reducing the carbon footprint of existing product and services? Is it possible to use innovation so that it helps develop alternative value chain that will allow to satisfy the core human need differently, while being aligned with a healthy environment, while being able to provide flourishing life to 10 billion people. So some of the current value chain does not fit in a 1.5 degree future. So it means that we will need to develop new one. And one of the role of innovation should be to support the development of this alternative value chain. Next slide. And here another representation of the same thing. So the current approach, as I said, is sector focus and problem oriented. How do we reduce the carbon footprint of current product and services? And everybody focus on its own problem. How can I reduce my emission? How can I become net zero? What we are proposing is to go beyond that. As I mentioned, this is needed. We will need to continue to do that. But we have to go beyond that and explore how innovation can be used in a more transformative manner. Because the problem of keeping the same product and services and trying to reduce their carbon footprint is that innovation is used only for incremental change. This is needed, but it will not be enough to achieve the 1.5 degree goal. We need more transformative use of innovation. And for that, we need to go beyond this sector-based approach and go back to the core human need and interrogate how innovation can be leveraged to develop alternative way of satisfying them with new value chain. Next slide, please. And here I would like to give a concrete example to illustrate what I have just said. When you talk about cities and means to reduce emission in cities, one of the first reaction is building transport. But when you go to the transport sector, people will mainly focus on alternative type of vehicle. So how can we shift from combustion car to electric vehicle? This is important. This needs to be done, but this is not enough. We need to ask the question, why car at the first place? Why do we need car? And then the response will be, we need car for mobility. Are there alternative way to satisfy this demand for mobility different from using a car? Can innovation help that? So, and we can see that innovation can be used to design city in a more compact and more complete manner, so that all or most of the services and products are available at biking and walking distance. And then you connect these complete and compact cities with very effective means of public transportation. Can innovation help do that? And in this case, it's not just about using innovation to improve car, but using innovation to reduce the need for car. We can even go one step further and say, why don't we use innovation to reduce the need for mobility? And that could be done also by leveraging the digital technology. So for example, using digital technology to replace a trip to walk through telecommuting, or teleconferencing to replace a trip to a conference, or online shopping to replace a trip to a shop. So here, it's not just about reducing the need for car, we actually reduce the need for mobility. So, and the more you are close to the core human need that we want to satisfy, the more your transformation, your change will be transformative. The more the innovation will be transformative. So we would like to complete the innovation that are, let's say, less transformative with this type of innovation that allow to go back to the core human need and find alternative way of satisfying them that are more aligned. Next slide. Now, third element. The third element is, when we are talking about innovation, we focus on technology. Technology is key, but innovative technology alone will not help us address the challenge that we are facing. We need much more than that. We need an integrated approach where innovative technology will be combined with innovative policy instrument, innovative financial instrument, innovative type of partnership, innovative business model, social innovation to address a given demand. And everything needs to be demand driven. You remember at the beginning I said that to address the issue of vicious circle, we have to translate the gap between the commitments that are based on capability and those that are aligned with the 1.5 degree goal into a demand for climate and sustainability solution. This demand will be what will drive the development of solution, and the solution will be on all these leverage points. One leverage point will not be enough. We need to combine all these things in an integrated manner. Next slide. So it allows us to move from a vicious circle, the first slide that I have shown, to a virtuous circle where many elements, this demand for climate and sustainability solution, and then the solution-based approach where entities are positioning themselves as solution provider, and the need-based element, all these things combined with some specific solution like a green bond framework that we have developed recently will contribute in translating the vicious circle in a virtuous circle where more NDC committing to provide climate and sustainability solution will support more ambitious conditional NDC, more climate innovation, and finally more ambitious unconditional NDCs. And this is what will dictate the design of the Global Innovation Hub. Next slide. So 3 elements for the Global Innovation Hub: a virtual hub, a physical hub in the form of pavilion at each COP. The photo that we are seeing here is our pavilion at COP26 in Glasgow, and then working group. We will have 7 working groups, 1 working group for each of the core human needs: nutrition and health, shelter, access, leisure, and clothing, and then 1 on cities, which is transversal, and also 1 on digital and data. Next slide. So the virtual hub will be actually a network of network. We do not want to replace existing network because we have innovation hub on finance, we have innovation hub on technology, we have innovation hub on policy, we have innovation hub on business model. But as I have mentioned, one of these leverage points will not be enough. We need to have integrated approach where all these different leverage points will be combined in a cluster to respond to a given demand for climate and sustainability solution. And here we have listed some of the functionalities that the digital platform should have. The first of them is that it should leverage a need-based backcasting scenario to translate the gap that we have between capability, commitment based on capability, and commitment aligned with the 1.5-degree goal. This gap needs to be translated into demand for climate and sustainability solution. The need-based backcasting scenario is what will allow us to start from what is needed and then translate it into solutions that need to be deployed currently. And then a database of demand for climate and sustainability solution, system for automated specification of demand, a deep search engine. So once we have a demand for climate and sustainability solution, the deep search engine will go out and look everywhere whether there are elements of solution that are available and that can be combined in a cluster to respond to the demand. And then a curation system, the solutions that are identified will need to be curated. And then broadcasting the missing solution. If there are some solutions that are not available, we will make this known so that the developer of solution can work on the missing solution. And we'll organize challenge for the development of this climate and sustainability solution. And once solutions are curated and then we have them ready for use, we will use a digital twin to forecast how the system will react. So to identify all the, let's say, unintended consequence related to the deployment of the climate and sustainability solution. Next slide. So just 2 words on this integrated green bond and carbon market that we would like to have on the platform. This will help mobilize low-cost finance for solution developer, particularly startup in developing countries. We know that in developing countries, they have the global south, they have some potentiality, but there are 2 main barriers: absence of demand, they do not have access to the market, and also finance. So we would like to develop this, which is a quite interesting new framework where we define a green bond like a normal bond to which you append a carbon credit. So, and it's inspired from what we are doing in the electricity system. In the electricity system, you are familiar with the REC, the Renewable Energy Certificate. When we are buying renewable electricity, you get the electricity, but you get also the green attribute of the electricity in the form of renewable energy certificate. The same here. You take a normal bond, and then you append to the normal bond the carbon credit, and this is what gives you a green bond. It solves a lot of issues. For example, the shade of green of a green bond. Is it light green? Is it dark green? You solve this issue. The monitoring and then tracking of use of proceed is no more needed if you do this, because you just append to the bond the carbon credit, so it means that this is truly green. Next slide. So we are working on this concept, and we want to, we are actually pilot testing the concept with the Bank for International Settlement and several other financial instruments and organizations that are operating in the green bond market. So we have the Hong Kong Monetary Authority who is funding the project. We have a Bank for International Settlement, the Bank of England, AIIB, and many other organizations involved. Next slide. One important element, if you want to incentivize entities so that they become solution provider, we should be able to measure the impact of their action as enabler. They are not reducing their own emission, but they are enabling others so that they reduce their own emission. On that, we are working with the European Commission on one project, the European Green Digital Coalition, which is focusing mainly on how do you measure the climate contribution of enabling entity like a high-tech company. But we will go beyond that. We will consider all the possible enabling entities, technology provider, policymaker, financier, and consumer. Next slide. Now the physical hub, this is what, these photos are taken from COP26, the pavilion of the Global Innovation Hub. So you have seen all these statistics, and we plan for COP27 to have exactly the same thing. So this is seen as a movement, and we really want this to be a movement with as many people involved as possible. Particularly in the working group, we invite experts and those that are interested to contribute to have the possibility to join this working group. Next slide. And I will conclude with this quote coming from Martin Luther King. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It understands that an edifice which produces beggar needs restructuring. Next slide. You have our website here, and thank you for your attention. So now, without further ado, I will invite our distinguished panelists to join the podium. So Ingo, Soren, as well as our panelists that are joining virtually. So thank you to all our panelists, and first of all, thank you so much for taking the time, despite your very, very busy schedule, to accept our invitation to join this panel and share with us your perspective on this very important project. So the first question that I will ask to all panelists is that you have followed the presentation. So what this has inspired you? Are there key elements that you consider we can further leverage to be impactful? And also if you have identified area where we can further improve, it will be very good to share your view. On that question, I would like to tap on the brain of all the panelists. So if you can all give your perspective, it will be really great. Maybe we can start with our panelists that are joining virtually. Maybe first, I would like to invite Phoebe, maybe to share her perspective on this project.
Thank you very much, Masaba. Indeed, it's a very impressive presentation because it goes to the heart of the problems. So I agree, we have not enough ambition, and because of that, we are failing to be tackling with the real problem. We are tackling the wrong problem. Yeah. And it's a very important.
Phoebe, just sorry, if you can introduce yourself quickly, because it will be also great so that the participant know who is participating to this panel.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Masaba. So I am Phoebe Kunduri. I'm a professor at the Athens University of Economics and Business, and at the Denmark Technical University, a professor of economics, and I'm also leading the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, the European section of that, and also the Global Climate Hub of this global network, UNFCCC. I have other hats as well. I see Kristen here. I'm also leading the country hub of EIT Climate Kick, and there we do quite similar work in terms of mapping the problem and trying through systems innovation to understand how we can solve the real underlying problem, and we can look at the system critically and rearrange the system in a way that it can work better in terms of solving the real problem and producing the technological pathways, but also the financial pathways that can help get us to our targets, to our future vision. The most impressive, because I see many speakers, but the thing that attracted my attention, although all of what you said, Masaba, is definitely along the lines we work under the different hubs that I wear. I like very much this idea of integrating green bonds and the carbon markets. It's very good because it is efficient. It joins two existing instruments into one in a way that reduces the need for assessment and monitoring, and tackles a very important problem in terms of greenwashing. Yes. So I think this is a very nice idea, and may I add, not just for climate change. It could also be used for biodiversity collapse. You can think of it to save the forest, to save other important biodiversity. It can be used in that perspective as well. And I think it is worth to try to mobilize attention to this brilliant idea. I think it is a brilliant idea. And it allows us more cooperation that I'm sure we both agree that is definitely needed. If I had to add something on this, I would say that bringing on board in a more explicit way the SDGs, so that we understand that we need to work on this holistic investment program, as I call the SDGs. The SDGs are an investment program. for the future we want. If we can bring out in your structure the SDGs framework, and maybe introduce the 6 transformation pathways that can be financed in similar modes that have been introduced by SDSN during the New York Climate Week, where we identify 6 transformation pathways: health and well-being, education and inequality, sustainable industry and decarbonization, sustainable cities and communities, sustainable use of land, water, and oceans, and of course, the digital revolution for sustainable development. So I am thinking that this is a great framework, again, focusing on the integrated green bond and carbon market, and it can function for quite a few of the transformations we need. And I will stop here by saying that this explicit inclusion of the SDGs and not focusing this framework just on the carbon market, but on all the natural capital and even social capital effort that is sustainable use of natural and social capital in our investment decisions and sustainable development plans. I would say that there we need to identify and monetize the different natural capitals for the different areas in the world and create a financing system as clever as this one for all of them. I'll stop here. Thank you, Masaba.
Thank you, Phoebe. And I will mention that we are exploring options for collaboration between the climate hub that we are implementing with the SDSN and our UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub. And then I will turn to Kirsten. What are your impressions, your perspective?
Thank you, Masamba. And in that case, let me build on Phoebe's comments. And you're okay? It's an echo.
Sorry?
So I think from my perspective, the value addition of the Global Innovation Hub is to explicitly name the logic of a stretch goal, of a mission, of naming the space as I so often hear you describe, between what we need to do to keep ourselves, to radically change our understanding of ourselves and our relationship to one another and the planet, and what we are telling ourselves is possible. So creating a global space, a global reference system that explicitly names the need to acknowledge there is a gap, to step into that gap, to understand that it is an unknown space, a space of exploration, a space of experimentation, a space of learning, and a space of self-transformation. From my perspective, that's an incredibly important institutional move, both to capture global imagination and to send a steady directional signal, like beaming out steadily, a beam of light that says, we are going in this direction. We are going to have to get beyond what we think and we are telling ourselves is possible, as Phoebe described it, as not having enough ambition. And we're going to need to get our hands and our feet and our minds messy in a space of not knowing and in reinventing ourselves in that space of not knowing. For me, that's a very, very powerful value addition in the core of a UN process that has gone through so much scars on its back, as it were, and kind of effort and institutional highs and lows. It's about time we set a bit of an electric volt right into the heart of what we're doing, with a sense of this needs to be about action. The second thing I think is absolutely essential, and this is going to be a critical success or failure point, is to acknowledge that without orchestration, systems change, systemic innovation, systems innovation, the marrying and the crashing together of different solutions and possibilities and synergies simply will not happen. So we need to acknowledge that's a job. It's a profession, it's a set of capabilities, it's a focus for finance, it's a focus for policy, and the Innovation Hub names the need for that and the space for that and the role for that, but we need to actually fill it and make it a real thing, because otherwise we keep telling ourselves we want integrated, holistic solutions. It's time to work across boundaries and sectors and silos, and then we don't finance that. We don't have rules that allow that. We don't know how to allocate or even think about policies that enable that or incentives that enable that. So we need a space that starts to make that possible. And then I think the last reflection on what could be done to make it effective? We are at the beginning of this journey, and we are all, from my perspective, we are responsible as founding partners and as organizations involved to try to make it effective. But I think for me, the number one challenge is we need to change the tools and the rules that we are using to direct finance towards innovation and to transformation and to direct political attention and governance structures. If we don't change those mechanisms, we are never going anywhere. And if I can give a very practical example, if we're going to be working in a systemic way, we're going to have to work in ways that enable multiple innovation solutions to interact, to combine, multiple innovation reframes on demand, on our sense of self to interact and combine in ways we've never thought about, really bringing together aspects of human existence, human life, human living and moving. And that means portfolios that are not financial portfolios, that are place-based, context-specific. And we need rules for financing and tools for financing portfolios that are not continuing to be attached to individual projects, individual deliverables, individual bankable assets, individual outcomes. We need to actually finance relationships, and we have no construct for doing that. So this is a space that is going to have to work out how to put the enabling frameworks, the reference system, the tools and the rules to make that possible, because it's desperately needed and urgently needed.
Thank you, Kirsten. And I would like to mention that Kirsten is the CEO of Climate Kick.
Sorry, Masandra, I should have mentioned that.
No problem.
Sorry.
Now, and I would like now to move to Professor Hunter. Professor Hunter, thank you for accepting our invitation. And we would like also to know what are your impression, what kind of input and feedback can you provide to us after having followed this presentation?
Masamba, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I am standing in for Sandrine Dixon de Cleve, the co-president of the Club of Rome, who has COVID, unfortunately, and so I told her, go rest. I'll be happy to be here. I am a professor of sustainable management at the Bard MBA. I'm on the executive committee of the Club of Rome, the steering committee of Partners for Planetary Emergency, and also Chief Impact Officer of a finance company, a little group called Change Finance. We built the first truly fossil fuel-free exchange-traded fund. I'm also a rancher. I spent this morning bucking 10 ton of hay. And what Kristen said about the need for integration is so critical. We have all the solutions. We're not at the beginning. In a sense, the beginning was 50 years ago with limits to growth. And that the conclusions of limits to growth have been revalidated. Gaia Harrington's report for KPMG showed that we are squarely on track for the worst of the collapse possibilities laid out in limits to growth. The new work by Jorn Randers, who was one of the lead authors of the original Limits to Growth, Per Espen Stoknes, and many of us in the Club of Rome, show that we have all the solutions. They have modeled these solutions and shown that we have the capacity, we have the capability of solving all of these problems in integrated ways, and doing so in ways that unleash human flourishing, address the issues of inequality, provide justice, we can feed all the people on Earth and do so with regenerative agriculture. Work by Vijay Kumar out of India, community managed natural farming, is showing he needs no artificial inputs, fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides, and doing so, he is putting carbon into the ground. Doing that increases the moisture holding capacity. So the poorest farmers in India are now able to have 3 harvests a year, where previously they could only have 1, and it's more profitable. Let's get over this false narrative that doing the right thing is going to cost more. New study out from INEP. I can put the URL of it in the chat box, showing that we have all the renewable energy technologies we need to wholly decarbonize the economy, and doing so at wartime urgency would save trillions of dollars. This is more profitable. Renewables now are more cost effective everywhere on Earth. They're cheaper than fossil. Why aren't we doing it? We, the world's people, allow our leaders to subsidize fossil to the tune of $5.3 or $4 trillion a year. That's $10 million a minute. What could we do with $10 million a minute? A lot. We subsidize industrial agriculture, fossil fuel-based, chemical-based, poison-based, to the tune of $1 million a minute. So why are farmers not transitioning? Actually, they are at warp speed, but why are they not moving even faster to regenerative? Because they're paid to do the wrong thing. So we don't need innovation in the sense of a new widget, a new technology. What we need is to implement what we bloody well know already is cheaper, already delivers higher human well-being. We know from the science, Dr. Greg Retalek has a paper, and I'll put that in the chat box as well, showing the Earth was once at 1,000 parts per million concentration of CO2. When humans evolved, it was the 280 parts per million. That should be our stretch goal. What do we want to have? 280 parts per million concentration of CO2. 1.5 is a nice interim goal. 280 parts per million. How do we do that? Grazing animals. Retalek's paper shows how it was the evolution of little horse-like creatures eating grass. At 1,000 parts per million, the Earth was mostly tree covered. I love trees. Planting more trees is not the answer. Having grazing animals graze the way that these prehistoric herds did, dense packed because there were predators, about to get eaten, safe place to be is in the middle of the herd. They eat everything in front of them, trample everything under them, fertilize everything behind them, move on, and don't come back until the grass has regrown. When you graze this way, you can add tons of carbon per acre per year. The highest I've seen is 15 tons of carbon per acre per year. 15 tons of carbon per acre per year. Do that on the world's grasslands. 1, you do a better job of feeding people the world around. 2, you make the herders and farmers more money. This stuff, again, is profitable. And you decarbonize the planet. If we did this on all the world's grasslands, the projections show 30 to 60 years' time, we get back to 280 parts per million concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. Now, all the world's grasslands, that's a big task. So it'll take a little bit longer. But if you couple renewable energy, which is cheaper everywhere, and regenerative agriculture, which does a better job of feeding, first of all, the poorest people on Earth, but all of us, with nutrient-dense, healthier diets. Couple those two, you solve the climate crisis, you do so at a profit. I'm a huge fan of carbon markets, of organizations like Grassroots Carbon that are taking the goals of companies to go net zero. and transferring the money to regenerative farmers and ranchers. Good thing to do. Big fan of green bonds. We know all this stuff. The innovation we need is, how do we burn this intensity into the hearts of everyone on Earth? And there are two ways to do that. One is do nothing, and we will suffer. As John Holdren said, you can mitigate, adapt, and suffer. And we're going to do all of those because we have left it till too late. If we had paid attention to limits to growth, we would already have solved this problem. What we are out of is time. What we must have is urgency. This is the decade of action. Let's act. Thank you.
Thank you, Hunter, for this very interesting input. And now I will move to the last panelist joining virtually, Dennis.
Thank you, Masamba. Yes, Dennis Pamlin. I'm the director of the Mission Innovations Initiative to try to see how do we actually measure these positive impacts and make sure that we don't have a piecemeal approach when we become carbon accountants. Maybe one of the greatest sickness of today is that people want to claim carbon neutrality and other things in very creative ways and lose the focus of people and how what we do today is actually helping people to live better lives. And I think one of the key challenges for us now is, building what Hunter was saying, is that we tend to think very small. And I think that's one of the benefits with the Global Innovation Hub, is moving away from this, what we call static problem approach. We take the current system for given, and then we just ask, how do we reduce that? And I think this is coming back to one of the key things is data. Because we say all these things, but if we don't have the data to support that, to see those things, it doesn't help very much. And today, as you were mentioning, Masamba, the way we structure things is based on sectors, and we allocate the emissions to them, and then we ask how to get rid of this. And of course, everybody then look at the big emitters and say, what's your strategy? And usually their strategy is CCS or something else that we hope will work. But basically just keep the system as it is and just make it fossil free. But we know that is not sustainable. That will not provide for 11 billion people or 10 billion people flourishing lives. So I think the main benefit of the UN Global Innovation Hub is really this shift and saying, let's not talk about carbon for a minute now and talk about how do we provide flourishing lives for 11 billion people. Because all of a sudden then, if you're a steel company and say, I don't know how my steel will be working. I have fossil-free steel here. We don't care if you have fossil-free steel. If that fossil-free steel is going to build oil platforms, then we're not interested in that. It doesn't matter if it's fossil-free. If you can show how that is helping building public transport or wind power mills, then you're part of the equation. But then you need to ask yourself, how are you part of a regenerative, circular economy that is not based on extraction of steel, making steel out of iron and doing that, but a circular economy. Because we need to look at the end results. And I think that's really the benefit of you saying, let's pause for a minute. We need to keep on, as you're saying, Masamba, with those things. But you say, for all the initiatives talking about net zero, science-based reduction target, etc., you might have been part of diverting the interest away from the core challenge. How do we provide the solutions? And you're actually keeping the old system. So you need to move out. And I think that is maybe one of the key things moving forward. We need to identify who are the stakeholders who are willing to expand their innovation agenda. Because today, there's a big business. People are selling offsets. They're selling all these things. And many of those are driven by people who don't want to change. So I think large of the current climate negotiations or large of the climate agenda is driven by people who found simple, short solutions that keep us in the old paradigm. And actually, I would say large of the current green bond is part of that also, because we're not talking about sustainable bond. We're talking about a specific small subset of bonds. And if we don't change the bond markets, but just have some green bonds, then again, we have another tool that is just doing incremental improvement in a broken system. So I think that is really at the core of this issue now here. But I'll come back again to information and data. But then the last thing that I also want to sort of emphasize, that I think for me personally is what I get excited about, is that this is a positive agenda. This is not about reducing emissions. This is not about telling people, don't do this, don't do that. It's about saying we are on the way to a very exciting future. And we are the first generation that can really provide flourishing lives for everyone on Earth. We've never been able to do that before. As Hunter was saying, the solutions are here. And now, if we can get that mindset of possibilities merge with the fact that you can have a legacy of providing education, nutrition, whatever the solutions are for humanity, that is what we want. We want those leaders, not leaders who commit to reducing their emissions, but people who commit to delivering what society needs. And I think that's where we are at a paradigm shift, because for 20 plus years, or 50 years if we go back to Stockholm, it's been very much of a problem agenda. And now we're trying to shift that away to an opportunity agenda. And that is a major shift for companies. They should not look at climate as a risk. Of course they can do that also, but primarily they should look at that as an opportunity. How do you sell what society needs? Not how do you try to account for getting down to zero, but how can you show that you in a sustainable way are providing what society needs? And that would be the greatest shift ever in the business community. And we see that happening all the time now. And it, as Hunter again said, it's happening quite fast, but it's happening under the radar, because that is not what environmental journalists and environmental people are looking at. So we also need very much to provide this forum for them that the Global Innovation Hub is providing. So I'm really excited about this. And the last thing I just want to say is the obvious one, concrete examples. We need them on the table so people see their flesh and bloods, entrepreneurs, farmers, poor people that are doing these things already. So we don't just have graphs of macroeconomic numbers, but real cases on the world. That is really what makes people excited also, when you see people of flesh and blood who are actually delivering these solutions today. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Dennis. I would like, before giving the floor to Ingo, to highlight one aspect, this aspect of solutions. I agree with both you, Dennis, and Hunter, that most of the technology solutions are in place. But I'm wondering whether the full set of solutions that are required on all the leverage points are actually available. I'm not sure whether the innovative partnership that are required are already available and in place. I'm not sure whether the innovative leadership that is required to make things happen is still in place. Yes, there are some elements, but I think there are still leverage points for which we need to innovate. And Ingo, this brings me back to the room. So what is your feedback on what you have heard so far? And you can comment on also the intervention of the other panelists so that it is more...
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be here and speak today. I appreciate that very much. You know, reading your paper, reading seeing the presentation, I think the gap that this group is filling is this moving from an incremental, piecemeal, project-based approach to the idea of a systemic approach. And I think the example that you presented about the integration of the carbon market into the bond market is a perfect example. The carbon market we know today is a project-based, incremental, here's a nice project with co-benefits, but it's not systemic, it's not transformational. So integrating a carbon market approach in a bond market takes it to a systemic level. I think it could be extended, you know, like if you have green bonds, why don't we put carbon liabilities in brown financial instruments? I mean, if you lend to a coal project, and if you had to take care of the carbon liability of that, a negative interest rate, nobody would, that's really thinking systemic to the end. No? So from project-based incremental to systemic, that's one important thing that you said. And the other thing that really struck me is the use of the word moonshot. Moonshot. What is a moonshot? Why is a moonshot transformational? Because it makes it extremely simple to align people behind a very easy to understand vision. When Kennedy said, actually at the university in Texas, back in the day, I'm not sure. He said, we'll send a man to a moon. He said, man, okay, well, like, you know, like, that's a man. He said that to engineering students of a Texas university, I forgot which one. A couple years later, I think 8 years later, the first rocket was shot to the moon. And who were the engineers in the room? It was the people that he told, we will send a man to the moon. So this is the power of a vision, right? Which brings me to my next point. What does innovation need? It's not information and knowledge, because we have that. We knew already 1970s Club of Rome. We know that knowing doesn't mean action. And I think in climate change, in our community, we fail to understand that. We still fail to understand that for the longest time. We believe that reading an IPCC report is all we need, kind of like to say, let's do. It's not. Because what we are forgetting is there is a science, it's called transformational science. And transformational science is about understanding the human side of what it takes to undergo radical paradigm-altering behavior modifications, shift. It's not information. There's a host of other things that need to happen before we as human beings are willing to change what we do. And this is transformation science. And this is actually something that I would like to see in this innovation group, that we work through these mechanisms. This goes now back to something else you said. When we act as humans, we act inside of our box. As a founder of South Pole Group, as a director of blah blah for blah blah bank, no? We are in these boxes. And we are acting in these boxes. And I think in order to get to real transformational change, we need to get out of this isolated kind of like box and need to work towards kind of like getting to a shared consciousness, like an aligned vision, like what a Moonshot project is. No? So how do we organize a process that allows us to connect much better, to develop a shared consciousness and purpose in our race to a solution? So this is, we have to take this conversation out of the 3 dimensions of finance, science, technology, policy, but we have to open it up to like a 4th and 5th dimension that is maybe much more spiritual in nature. What if our actions were informed by, like, say, if we could experience the future today, if we could experience the consequences of our action today, not of our actions today, but in the future, like kind of like truly like experience 4-dimensionally, right? Or 5-dimensionally, and connect kind of like with other living beings or plants. Again here, big reference to indigenous cultures, who basically still have that ability. If we could do that as a group, how would we act? And would that not be a great facilitator and catalyst to innovation and action? So it's that dimension that I'm very interested in, I think, when we talk about kind of like innovation, and is it something that we can bake into this process? Maybe I'm not suggesting that we all have to do ayahuasca experiences in the Amazon or microdose psychedelics, but it's like, what can we do, that kind of like gets us, like that makes it easier for us to kind of like have that shared sense of purpose in a diverse group. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingo. Your intervention responds partly to one of the challenges that we are facing, how to promote radical collaboration. I think you are very right. A shared sense of purpose can facilitate radical collaboration in the sense that it provides the understanding of the need of coordinated effort. And it provides understanding of the need to subordinate specific interest to, let's say, the creation of global public good. And this is something important for collaboration. Now we move to our last speaker, but not the least. Soren, maybe you have not introduced yourself quickly.
Yeah, I mentioned it briefly. Ingo Pool, I'm one of the founders of South Pole Group. We are a very active participant in the carbon markets, driving a transition everywhere.
Yes, Soren, maybe you introduce yourself first.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Søren Giegler. I'm a program manager for digital and green transformation at the GIZ, German Development Corporation. And we've been working for the last, 2 years or so together on developing some of these concepts. So first of all, I just wanted to share with you that I'm just back. We organized what we call the fact-finding mission in 8 African partner countries. And it was really fascinating to see. Like the first role for the Global Hub, I think, is to listen, consult, and from policymakers and civil society, private sector, from the Global South. And to bring that need to partners in development agencies in the North or Asia, in Europe and North America. So basically that connector. Based on this really detailed consultation we've done, we were struck to see the following. First, a lot of policymakers really want to engage with this topic. They want to know how to innovate, how to change things. They want to use technology for climate action, but also biodiversity protection and the broader sustainability action. But unfortunately, they don't know how. So the second thing is, I would say, is the how-to. And there are also certain risks. So we have to be very open. Technology has a lot of opportunities, but also risks. So just talking about data, how you use data privacy, data protection, what is an open, fair market for digital technologies? So these are topics policymakers are struggling with. So basically, in that sense, I really recommend to provide policy advice to policymakers on innovations that can make a real difference for climate action. And in that sense, to provide also experiences. The second is South-South learning. So to facilitate, for instance, we had amazing conversations between Senegal and South Africa, for instance, where there's a lot of cross-fertilization, or actually, since it's a global program, I would recommend, so for instance, linkage between Latin America and the Africa region and Asia, to basically bring that knowledge together concretely. Because what is missing right now, it's not, I think, the political will, it's more the knowledge, the real concrete examples. I can give you an example. For instance, in Namibia, we talked a lot about green hydrogen. So green hydrogen, how could that be developed? And then the topic came up, well, how do you monitor whether hydrogen is green or not? How do you evaluate it? So there's a lot of knowledge which actually do the whole topic about smart monitoring and evaluation. So how to use technology, IoT, blockchain, artificial intelligence, technologies like that to monitor whether CO2 are actually reduced or not. These technologies are very complex. I mean, let's just be honest, it's not easy. There is a lot of knowledge, but there's a lot of knowledge on the climate change side, and then there's a lot of knowledge on the innovation or digital side, and they usually don't meet. So the experts who are like digital experts, they're climate change experts, and to bring those two worlds together, I think is another important role. The third role, I would say, is innovation ecosystems. You talked about startups. Basically, how do we foster innovation ecosystems, local innovation systems, local, regional, global. And there you could be a bridge. For instance, we have worked with innovators in Finland. Sitra had a very interesting pilot program in Finland, and how could that to measure the carbon footprint of imports. So how do you, for instance, I met with startups in Namibia. They work together with Finnish startups to develop products. and services in a different field. They did, but not on climate action. But I just wanted to give you that as an inspiration, that bridge, I would call it innovation bridge, between, say, for instance, Europe and Africa. And then the fourth, and it was mentioned already, is finance. It's all about investments and finance. So basically, and innovative finance. So the key issue right now, it's not that there's no access to finance, but the risk is too high. That basically a lot of investors shy away from basically innovative tools, applications. You just have to talk to any startup or scale up. They don't find the appropriate finance to scale up their innovations in climate action. So now I just wanted to quickly share that. So we are taking action. So we're working very closely with the European Commission, the EU, on what we call a Team Europe initiative. Together, Germany, like our Ministry of Development Cooperation with Sweden, Finland, Estonia, Belgium, France. So we come together as Europeans to develop a program that will support the Global South, specifically on the twin transition, digital and green transformation. And we'll be happy to work closely with you together on that. But I really think that the time is now, and it's all about bringing the right people together, because the knowledge does exist. But the policymakers in the Global South, I think, really would appreciate a lot of support, guidance on how to do this. And that's, I think, where should be a strong focus. Thank you.
Thank you, Søren, for your intervention. I would like now to turn to our public. Is there any question you would like to ask to our panelists?
Thank you so much. Alex Holz from the Good Food Institute. We work in the food sector on transformative innovations. I have to say I'm extremely inspired by this panel and by the whole hub. It's a very different language and a different atmosphere than lots of other side events that I've attended over the past few days. So I appreciate all the interventions. My question is, Masamba, you started your presentation by describing how at the moment we are usually stuck within what we know or think is possible and not thinking outside of that. And I think that's right. But when we talk about finance, when we talk about mobilizing action and ambition to actually make those transformative innovations happen that we need, that finance is oftentimes still like controlled by the existing governance structures we have, like the UNFCCC, we have the negotiations. And so I'm thinking about the startups, Søren, that you mentioned that could benefit from climate finance that is being funneled through the Green Climate Fund and other instruments. So whatever comes out of this hub, which again, I feel like this is really a huge opportunity, whatever comes out of it in terms of results and recommendations and knowledge that is being proposed, how do you think you can feed that back into the existing decision-making mechanisms within UNFCCC, within the international climate negotiations? Because I think that could be a key role, like normalizing the idea of transformative innovation within this whole international climate community. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, which is actually an excellent question. So who among the panelists would like to take that one?
I'm happy to start, Masamba.
Oh.
I can say something very quickly if you want.
Yes, Phoebe.
So, the whole panel has basically pointed to, We have quite a lot of technology, and we know that the pace of technological innovation will continue to be unprecedented like never before in the human history. And we know that there is a lot of money around the world. There is money, there is technology, there is even willingness on the policy spectrum. However, I agree that we need to ask these questions that has been, like the one that has been posed now. How do you do it? How do you make the innovation ecosystem talk to those that are potentially the financing public-private partnerships of the innovations in order to be massively deployed? And how do you engage these innovation financing system with the transposition of the implementation of the policies? And how do you revise the finance, the technology, the innovation, and the financing of the innovation with the policies? How do you fine-tune all this? And I have to tell you that when you talk to the businesses, the big ones, not the SMEs, are more aware how to make this cross-fertilization. But when you talk at a higher level, like national level or regional level, really the capacity is very low. And that's why we said that it is quite important to recognize the need for governments to take immediate decisive action to reduce the impact of climate change. But in order to do this, they really need help in detailing the pathways and detailing the cross-fertilization between innovation, finance, and pathways. So I'm thinking that what is needed, and that's why I'm involved in setting up this global climate hub, is to really bring know-how to the national governments, to the local governments, to the regional governments, but also to the business world and the financing world. How do we detail the pathways towards climate neutrality? Which innovations, where they are coming from, when each one will be massively deployed, what are we waiting in the next 5 years, when hydrogen will be relevant, and detail the pathways and their financing. Unless you detail it and unless you engage, truly engage all the stakeholders in this detailing and then in the implementation of the detailing, it is impossible to have the transformation happen at the time that we need it to happen. I was very happy to come back from the COP26. That was the only COP I came happy from, because I've seen that the financial system and the business system are now engaged in this transition. And they are engaged because the innovation, the fourth industrial revolution, and the pace of technological innovation have made it cost effective and has created huge profitable opportunities. And now they are engaged. But in order to accelerate the engagement, we really need to help, to enable, to facilitate the cross-fertilization and help facilitate the detail of the transformation. And this could be Masaba's hub, other hubs that are providing this capacity to the different layers of of administration, both at the public and at the private level. Because in order to create this shared status of purpose among experimental economies, so we have virtual reality experiments of how you create this thing, you really need to make people to share expertise, and you really need to work with people, and it might not be something that you can create in 2, 3, 4 years at the global level. So you really need to facilitate this in order to provide the capacity that is needed.
Thank you, Phoebe. So next, Kirsten, Ingo, and then Dennis. Kirsten.
Yeah, I'm going to insert myself here because I think a bridge between Phoebe and on to what I suspect Dennis will say as well. I think the opportunity for the Global Innovation Hub is to act as an institutional hacker. And I think it's incredibly important for us to do some significant institutional hacks. And by that, I mean, for example, one of our biggest problems is that finance continues to talk about climate and sustainability as a category of finance, not as simply the entire world needs to work out if we want to survive, how many of us we're willing to let survive or not survive, and what it's going to do to us as human societies if that choice means billions die. So we need to restructure our entire concept of economics and value to align to our decision making in that sense, not have a category of finance that does climate. But if we're going to do that, then we have to work out and we have to think about the way in which the existing financial system thinks. So if you think about what happened in the credit crisis, we gave teeth to the Financial Stability Board, and we identified a set of institutions as too systemically important to fail. And all of a sudden, we started to put through solvency and governance requirements, and I was working in those institutions. It made a massive difference overnight. Do we think it has solved the world's problems? No. But what if we start to identify value chains, regions in the world that are too systemically important not to change, and then begin to make and put the institutional rails around what that means in terms of incentives and penalties and so forth? What if we start to do what Molly Jan did and persuade the Lloyd's market to start including a category of risk in terms of multiple breadbasket failure, where all of a sudden you create a product which attracts the attention of an existing system to pay attention? What if you talk and you bring in pension funds and the big institutional investors into the context of the UN process and make an argument about fiduciary responsibility? Pensions are paid to maximize the asset holdings and pension holders. Pension holders need a world stable enough to spend the pension in. It's a short extension of fiduciary duty to take percentages of assets under management and invest it hard in a managed accelerated transition towards the integration of the solutions that we have and a reframe around sustainable living. So I think there are ways in which this institution can, at the heart of the UN process, work with the existing system to redirect its attention and its sense of self on how we think about risk and how we think about opportunity. And it needs to stop being a subcategory.
Thank you, Kirsten. Ingo? And then Dennis.
So my own kind of theory on that is like innovation always steps on somebody's toes, though it's on the incumbent. And behavior is explained not by knowledge, but by self-interest. Basically, it's a reward for something. And there's like no alignment. So incumbents, interest, and reward for behavior, different from what an innovator wants, different from what kind of like the world needs sometimes. And that's kind of like what we fight again. How does innovation work best? It always starts at the outside of the incumbent system. And I think that's actually really important for that group. Like to say, you cannot ask the institutions of the incumbent system to deliver the innovation. It has to come from the outside. Like, look, why was the first delicious plant-based burger not invented by McDonald's, but by a startup called Impossible? Why is the first cool electric car not Ford, but Tesla? It's like, so it starts on the outside, and the incumbent system switches, like as a tipping point almost, when the outside pressure becomes big enough, which usually happens at when kind of like the innovation is at a 10%, 10 to 15% like penetration ratio. And I think that's like in the food industry, we can see it happening, right? I think why is Ford now producing electric cars? Because I think this is the future. Why are traditional meat companies now going into plant-based because of that? And I think, again, maybe, and this is a really good point for this working group, no? Let's not make the mistake of turning the control of the innovation we want to create over to an incumbent institutional structure, but to an institutional structure that represents the desire for change. And we have those alternative structures that stand for change, that want to create that pressure on that incumbent system.
Fully agree with you. We have to work with entities that are disruptive and that are exploring alternative way to satisfy human needs. Dennis.
Yes, I think I can build on this, because I think this is very much, we're getting to a little bit more of the crux of the challenge here now, zooming in from the very macro into what are the actual next steps. And I think one of the key things here is to make sure that we have the startup community and entrepreneurs at the core, because those are not bound by current structures, the current cultures of providing fossil-free steel or trying to go electric with their old cars. They look at the needs in society. I don't say that they sit on all the solutions, but if we just had as a shift, not asking the big polluters, and that's really playing into your image also, Masamba, instead of asking those who pollute today, we just say that we'll keep on doing that, but the main focus will be for those who have solutions moving forward, just to send that signal to society, but also then ask all stakeholders to change their role. So for cities, you've been asked to reduce your emissions, to have net zero strategies. Put that to the side and see, how can you become a global leader of exporting solutions and spreading? That doesn't need to be export by economic means, can also be spreading new ideas. But leaders lead. They don't lead in isolation, they help others. So for this to really work, we need to ask, what are the cities that are going to export? Is Baoding, the China city who is exporting renewable energy and LEDs, much more sustainable than the Western cities that are in the forefront of reducing emissions but are exporting SUVs, many of the German and Sweden cities included? So we really need to ask some very difficult questions that will upset some people also. And I think Inga was talking about that, because we not just talk about the incumbent industries, we talk about the incumbent environmentalists, those who were born in the 70s and 80s and who have been selling the offsets and who've been doing all these things, and now their business model are being challenged. So who of those can expand their innovation agenda? And who of those will stay and say, no, we'll do that? That's okay also. But then you're part of the static problem agenda and make clear that that is your case. You're not part of the solution agenda. So I think that's a little bit where also the transparency comes into the UNFCCC's Global Innovation Hub as a very good means to, and I know we've started some work with that already to show who are moving in this agenda and how are they sort of playing different roles. Because I think for most people, including policymakers, this is still not known. What they consider as climate leadership is committing to deep reductions and not asking how that is global sustainable. It's not about providing solutions for tomorrow. And that will sort of open up the eyes for many people. And the last thing that I want to say also, this is for the youth. They are the one who's going to live in this future. For them to be involved, to see that their peers in their age, their solution providers, the next generation of company leaders are being acknowledged at scale. Not just as a token, as a youth representative, but as the future representative, as those who actually make a difference. That will also upset the system, I think, and sort of help the new generation of saying, we are the ones, we are the next Apple, we are the next Amazon, we are the one who actually going to be the leaders of tomorrow, instead of asking the big polluters. Instead of, not just only that. So that's the last thing I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. 1 minute to Hunter and 1 minute to Ingo. And then we will close.
Let's be careful not to focus on non-solutions. Masamba, you mentioned the solutions economy. How do we meet the actual needs that people have for access, not just for a car? Change is coming extraordinarily rapidly. It was mentioned that change comes from the outside, not from the incumbents. It is very likely that a man named Tony Seba, who wrote the paper Rethinking Humanity and also Rethinking Energy and Climate and Transport, is right that enormous technological change will happen by 2030. One of the innovations we need is, what if Tony's right? This gets to the work of Mark Campanelli and Carbon Tracker. There are enormous stranded assets on the order of $25 trillion that are being stranded. The defenders of those assets are going to work very hard to keep their business models intact. How do we counter that? Things like Impossible Burger. It's cute. It is GMO, highly processed, chemicalized, mechanized. It's not an answer. Hydrogen. It's not an answer. The engineering economics of hydrogen will probably defeat it, except in a few niche markets. Let's not throw trillions of dollars after non-solutions. So there needs to be a mechanism of evaluating the basic cost effectiveness of the solutions that we're going to want to pursue. On entrepreneuring, there are some really good entrepreneuring groups. Unreasonable Group, working with hundreds of entrepreneurs on 6 continents, empowering them to bring these solutions to reality, billions of dollars invested in a tool called Rebel Base, which enables an individual entrepreneur to work through what are the questions they need to answer. We're working now through the BARD MBA, getting this to schools around the world. These sorts of process innovations ought to be supported. Finally, how do we bring together all of the groups that are interested in doing this? Sandrine, whom I'm standing in for, pulled together a thing called Partners for Planetary Emergency. Kick's a part of it. Fridays for the Future is a part of it. The Youth Movement, Carbon Tracker, 300, almost 400 organizations around the world that are members of Partners for Planetary Emergency. I highly recommend that your innovation hub join that, collaborate with it, read the Planetary Emergency Plan. We laid out what is it going to take to solve these problems and what are the processes that you need. Happy to be of any assistance that I might be. There is no chat box, so I will email to every one of you for whom I have an email address the documents that I mentioned. Count me as a resource. Happy to be of any help.
Thank you, Hunter, for the invitation, particularly for the invitation addressed to the UN Climate Change Innovation Hub to join this coalition. Definitely, we are very much interested, and we will follow up with you on that invitation. Now, the last word to Ingo.
Yeah, just very clear, just 1 minute. I just want to be on the record. I'm not saying that I want to kill incumbents. I just think that we need this external pressure to motivate them to flip, to change kind of like sides. But then also I think for the Innovation Hub to stand ready to work with those incumbents that are serious about joining transition. I think that's the second innovation process, right? First, the outside pressure, getting to tipping point, and then after tipping points, getting to flipping the incumbent system into something new. So that's kind of like a step 1, step 2 kind of like a thing. I just wanted to make sure that that's kind of like said. Yeah.
Thank you for that point. And for us, it's extremely important because we are asking very often ourselves whether the incumbent do not have interest actually on working on the innovative solution and trying to find solutions that not only are aligned with the climate and sustainability goal, but that will allow to repurpose the knowledge and competence in their own value chain as well as the asset, because this is their interest, because otherwise others will come with solution and will not take care 100%. Of their asset, and then, yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you for your very interesting perspective and your engagement. And thank you also for the public for staying so late after a very long day. I would like to invite you now to join me in thanking our panelists with a round of applause. Thank you.